Hi everyone, I hope you're well. Yesterday I finished reading possibly the worst book I've ever read in my life. Most bad books that I have read, I have found at least some degree of effort that I can recognize that the author put in the story, or I can recognize some merits. Most of the books that I have rated that I would say are bad books, I have given maybe 1.5 stars, 2 stars, 2.5, which means that I recognize some good things in them. And honestly, in this case, I feel like even the half star that I give it out of 5 is kind of generous. So I'm sure there are worse novels out there. There can always be something worse. I mean, don't ever think that you have seen the worst of it in any aspect in your life. It's called 99% Mine, okay? That's what it's called. Let me just get to my notes. So this book is a contemporary romance. Some of you are going to stop here and say, well, that's your first problem, right? But no, not really, because there are things here that could have been done much better and still, have it be a contemporary romance. So this story is about a woman who works at a bar, and to give you a very simple summary, a childhood friend of hers who she's always had a crush on, and he's also her brother's best friend. His name is Tom, her brother's name is Jamie, and her name is Darcy, by the way. I forgot to say that her name is Darcy, like Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. I'm just gonna leave it at that. This crush of hers is going to renovate her house, and so her brother and her can sell it reluctantly because she doesn't want to sell it, but So Darcy is the one narrating, and her narration is possibly, even though it's pretty bad, it's possibly the best aspect of this book. And as always, I start off with writing style. So with the writing style, I give it half a star. That's where the half star comes from. Everything else, it's going to go downhill from there. For the most part, it's a very simple style with maybe some interesting lines here and there. At some points, the style is kind of trying to be interesting and have a few more creative romantic words, phrases and lines and stuff like that. Sometimes it kind of pulls it off, and a lot of the times it doesn't. It kind of, it's trying to thread that line between romantic wording and cringe lines, and a lot of the times it goes into cringe bin. Also, she kept using this term of alpha male and alpha in general in referring to people, which at first I thought that maybe she was using that term sort of ironically, or something, but she kept using it and in ways that made it clear that she was being very serious about it, like she was thinking about it like it was a real thing that people were, And she used that word so much that it almost seemed like she had no real way of classifying people other than alpha and I guess beta in comparison, although she didn't use that word. The dialogue sounds really fake. Sometimes it makes you think nobody really sounds like that, nobody says that. And a lot of the dialogue actually is exposition, and not in a plot way really. It's exposition of the characters. Like a lot of the times the characters, including the narrator, are constantly talking about how the love interest, Tom, like I said, he's so perfect and amazing and kind and nice and everything. And this is repeated over and over, okay? This never stops being something that has to be told to you every minute of the story. Also, the dialogue doesn't have speaker tags, so a lot of the times you're confused as to who even said what. So it makes you confused as to what the narrator actually said and what she was just thinking, or what another character said. Honestly, some parts of the narration are so... I don't want to overuse the word cringe, honestly, because I feel like that's a bit overused already, but it felt like I was reading my Immortal, some of the lines, not all the way through. There was this line where there was a point where he's at the bar with her, she's with a love interest, and she's walking beside him or something, in front of other people, and the line says, "The women look jealous, the men avert their eyes. A lot of preps stared at me, I put up my middle finger at them." The next point is the plot and the storyline. I would say this is actually the worst aspect of this novel, actually. I would warn you at this point that maybe there's gonna be spoilers or something, but honestly, I don't think anything in this novel can be considered to be a spoiler. For one, the few things that happen are very, very predictable. And also most of what happens is not really story, things that happen or change things in the story, but rather it's just a matter of the dynamic between the couple or potential couple. The things that do happen in the story, in fact, I would say are the things that the story itself, the summary told you that they would happen. And there are 2 chapters at the beginning. The first 2 chapters take place in the bar where she works. And those 2 chapters are completely unnecessary. Nothing important happens in them. None of the characters introduced in those chapters matter. They make no difference to the story whatsoever. The love interest is only introduced in the 3rd chapter. So it doesn't. Those 2 chapters could have been completely edited out and the story would have been at least a little bit better. And then after that, there's like 6 chapters of her only saying, the loving interest, she sees him again after those 2 chapters. In the 3rd one, she sees him again. And then those, for like 6 chapters or something, she's just constantly whining about how he's so perfect and amazing and attractive and everything, but she can have him because he's engaged. You know from the beginning that he's not actually engaged. In fact, it's in the summary as well. But you wouldn't even need the summary, really, because from the beginning, she asks him about it and he starts to avoid the subject and everything, so it's like pretty obvious that he's single again. So the entire time she's like, oh, I want to have him, but I can't because he's engaged, and she just says the same thing over and over while they are flirting, by the way, while they're flirting at her place. She's constantly saying this to herself, and it's so frustrating, for one, because I don't know, it's like you're supposed to be on her side even though she's potentially cheating on helping him cheat. And also he's flirting with her even though he's supposedly engaged, and he doesn't actually tell her again that he's not engaged anymore. So he's completely fine, obviously he knows he's not cheating, but she doesn't. So it's really strange how he's putting her in this situation where he won't tell her clearly that there can be something between them, and while also flirting with her, but he also doesn't want to tell her that he does want to have something with her. It's like this really dumb, limbo to be in. But that's possibly the least of my problems here. Well, actually, I don't know. And here's the thing, I would be much more forgiving of the flaws of this story if the romance itself was good and cute and likable, or there was something to like in the romance itself, but there isn't. Everything about this story is not well planned. Everything is so, I think it's lazily written, or maybe they just didn't have a good editor. Like I said, throughout the whole story, her and other characters are constantly talking about how he's such an amazing person, he's the best guy there is. And the thing is, he's not even that great. And it's not like we were supposed to think that the narration was, well, we do know that the narrator is, flawed. We do know that her character is kind of flawed, but we're not supposed to see her narration as unreliable, because he is forgiven by the story. The story constantly, whenever he does something that is wrong, the story and everyone else will immediately forgive him because, he did it for a very good reason. He doesn't have to change. He doesn't have to evolve. Neither does the main character, really. She does a little bit, but I'll go on that later. The story doesn't actually have an antagonist. For a while you think that the brother is going to be the villain or the antagonist of the story, but then he arrives to where they are, this potential couple, and then he starts to antagonize them, or more specifically antagonize her, and then he just kind of stops being the antagonist, and instead it's not the main character, it's the love interest Tom who becomes the antagonist, because he starts to, to tell you the summary version, the main character, the narrator, Darcy, she does something that he didn't want her to do, and he gets really mad. Something that honestly isn't really that big of a deal, but whatever. He gets mad about it, he gets really mad, and then he storms out and disappears. And it's like, and we're supposed to think that this guy is like the best guy there is in this world, okay? But whatever. I think that's something that the story could have been improved by, is having a real antagonist. I think maybe specifically an antagonist for the love interest, who by extension is also an antagonist for the main character. I'm not going to give more detail than that because that's effort that, you know, should have been made by the writer. And honestly, the entire story is so much forced conflict for the dumbest reasons. Something happens between them, you know, it's that whole thing that is so frustrating to read, because something happens between them, they get closer to each other, then something incredibly minor and really dumb happens and they have a fallout or they fight or something, and then the same thing happens, they get closer together, they fight, they get closer together. Now of course in any story you have to have some conflict, and in a romance novel you often have to have conflict between the main characters, right? Between the two people that are supposed to come together at the end. But conflict doesn't mean fighting for dumb shit. So the thing is, as soon as she learns that he's actually single, she's like, fuck me now, which, I mean, okay. I mean, we all do weird stuff sometimes, and she shouldn't have done that, right? Kind of a dumb decision. But then he gets mad. Like, why does he get mad? He can just say no and be done with it. Like, why does he have to be all cold and mad about it? I mean, you know, the really, really forced lack of communication that real adults, you know, are expected to not even behave this way. I would expect, you know, adults to not behave this way. And that's why I'm saying that it seems forced, because it doesn't seem like these people are acting the way that real people would actually act. It seems like the author just had to have a real story that can be made with these two characters, so she just kind of made them fight over and over so that they could have some conflict in the story. And then it uses that trope that I honestly really dislike in romance, where the antagonist, so to speak, or the person who's antagonizing the main character in that moment, which in this case was her brother, tells the protagonist, tells her, oh, Tom will never love you because, you know, he's too good for you and yada yada, you know, and starts to lie about him and tells her that he's going to get back with the woman that he broke up with. Every time this trope happens, the main character will take this antagonist at full face value. Like, they will not even doubt what they're saying. It's so frustrating to read, honestly. Like, this person has been hostile to you before, and for some reason you just want to believe them in what they're telling you. I mean, come on. I just hate that. Okay, next point is characters. The narrator is so annoying, and I understand, like I have mentioned before, she's meant to be flawed, and we are supposed to see her as flawed, but it's a bit too much, you know? I mean, being an annoying character because of your flaws is, I guess, a step above being a Mary Sue, but I'm not going to, you know, give it to this author just because she decided to do the opposite if she didn't really pull it off. And the thing is, I don't think it works precisely because the story doesn't really acknowledge her flaws in a way that makes her change them by the end. And if she does change, here's the thing, by the end she is apparently kind of different, but she's only changed because she got what she wanted. She only changed because she got this guy, you know, the crush, the love interest. And no, the story should have changed her, not the fact that she got the guy. I mean, the things that happened throughout the story, they should have been the things that have changed her. But of course, how could have she changed by the story if there was nothing happening in the story? Her personality just makes it really difficult to read, because again, all that she does is complain about the guy that the fact that she can get this guy, and really she's kind of a stereotype herself. You know, she's a badass, right? Because she has short hair and she's tomboyish and she's a bartender, so you know. And also she's snarky, you know, because that's what makes a character interesting, being snarky. That's what makes you a badass as well, you know, being snarky. Okay, I'm not against snarky characters before you think that I am. I'm not. I mean, they can be funny, but she's not even the funny kind of snarky, you know? She's not funny, she's just bitter. You can tell she's really immature emotionally because the entire story, I mean, unprompted, you know, for no reason, she's constantly comparing herself to Megan, who is the love interest's ex-girlfriend who he had been engaged with at some point. And she's constantly like, Megan would never touch a hammer, and I'm here doing manual labor and having short hair. I mean, Lord Almighty. And then she's sometimes like, oh, if someone else touches him or tries to marry Tom, then I will kill him. I will, you know, throw them down a fucking well. Like, I'm supposed to be siding with you. You're making it very difficult. And since I am talking about characters, I do want to mention the love interest, Tom. He's so bland. I mean, he's a decent guy for the most part, I guess, except for those times where, he seems to purposefully not want to communicate, and the times where he just leaves whenever something slightly difficult happens, whenever something emotionally difficult happens with her, or they kind of have a bit of a, conflict or whatever, they have some issues between them, he just leaves. He's like, oh, I'm not gonna be here with you, because like it's almost like he doesn't want to work it out, which, I mean, I know there has to be some conflict in the story, but this is ridiculous, especially when it happens over and over. I mean, if the same thing happens over and over, then there's no real progress in the story. It's just one thing happens, and then another happens, and then another happens. That's barely a story. I honestly don't really see what is so special or interesting about him. Also, he's really possessive, which I guess, is cute in fiction. I mean, it can be cute in fiction or whatever, but it would be more forgiving. I would be more forgiving of his possessiveness if he had a personality besides that, or if he had some interest besides that, or he has something to him. The rest of the characters are basically just stereotypes, or they're very, very bland. She has a co-worker named Holly, and she's one of those characters that only appears in the first 2 chapters and doesn't matter after that. She's like a sort of naive dumb girl who only got the job because she's hot. Megan is a high maintenance type of girl, like I mentioned. The character is constantly going on about her passive aggressively, like, oh, she's so perfect and I'm not, right? Yeah, I guess not. Vince is a guy that she was dating before. He's kind of like a fuckboy stereotype. Other characters, like I said, are bland. They barely feel like people. Her best friend barely feels like a real person. Jamie is possibly the character that is given the most nuance, because he's sort of, like I said, he's sort of the antagonist at some point, but he's sort of redeemed because that he acts like an asshole only because he cares about her or something. Obviously they're brothers, they're twin brothers, but I still don't like him as a character, and he's still not very fleshed out. None of the characters are fleshed out, not the love interest, not the main character, none of them. My next point is depth. I don't know how to pronounce that. Every time I say this in camera, the captions call it death. I don't know, but listen, I know that these books are for enjoyment. Of course, I did read for enjoyment, really, because I'm interested in the whole childhood friend who then, after a while, you rekindle your relationship with him and you start dating or whatever. I like that trope, the childhood friend trope. And it's not like I expect a lot of, like a philosophical dissertation from a romance novel. But there seems to truly be nothing to be taken from this novel. Maybe if he had made more of a criticism of their behavior, of both of them, I would have been more forgiving on this aspect. Maybe give it a half star, or maybe even a full star, or anything. If there had been any sort of discussion about grief, about mortality, or something, because those topics were sort of brushed on. Were sort of mentioned in the story, but there was no development of them. There were a lot of topics in the story, really. It's just that none of them were really taken anywhere. The characters didn't actually change throughout the story. They really had to reflect on anything, because even though, like I said, she's kind of terrible throughout the book and she's supposed to be better by the end, but she's only better because she got the guy. I mean, yeah, people can definitely, help you improve as a person. But again, the problem is that she should have been changed by the things that happen in the story as a whole, by the entire story, not by one small aspect of the story, which was her getting the guy. And there is actually a point that could have been interesting where he says that she idealizes him and that she's expecting him to be perfect, and that's, a lot of pressure on him or whatever. But it doesn't really go anywhere because, like I said, at the end of it all, the story doesn't want to acknowledge that the guy is actually not perfect. The story doesn't want to acknowledge him as flawed. So why is that supposed to be something that we are supposed take from it, you know? Why even have that piece of dialogue there if you're not going to actually deliver on that idea? My last point is in my personal enjoyment of the story, and I think by this point you can clearly tell that there was nothing here that I even remotely enjoyed. Besides all of the issues that I mentioned already, and you know, I know that it's a contemporary romance or whatever, but it's strangely, for the genre that it is, it's really depressing to read. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because their relationship is really bland and there's this sort of like strange dynamic going on that reminds you of like really toxic relationships or unhealthy relationships. You know, those couples that fight all the time because they're tired of each other and they shouldn't even be together. It reminds you of that, because every time there's some misunderstanding or something really minor happening, they immediately blow it out of proportion and then fight and then, you know, get together after not really discussing it much. It just kind of happens, and then the same thing happens over and over and over until the book is finished. And I was pretty glad that I finished it. I pretty much only finished reading it because it was part of the challenge or part of my video that I'm going to make about reading romance novels. Honestly, I don't think I would have been able to finish reading this book otherwise. I really suffered through it. I hope that I never have to read anything like this ever again.